If you're retired or close to retiring and you think taxes will go up for you in the future, if your income is higher in retirement, then you may want to think about converting some of your traditional IRA or traditional 401ks to a Roth. And again, that's based on a year-end date. So if you want to do this, you'd have to do this before the end of the year.
Are you ready for a successful retirement? We're addressing the topics facing today's retirees. Welcome to Retire with Ryan. Now here's your host, Ryan Morrissey.
Welcome back. As we're getting closer to the end of the year and in light of the current political situation with the election still not fully determined and also a potential change in the Senate with 2 Senate seats in Georgia that are due for an election runoff after the first of the year, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about some year-end tax planning strategies and also some just year-end planning tips to make sure that your financial plan is on solid and sound footing. So I talk about goals at a number of these podcasts, but it's definitely a good idea if you haven't thought about your goals since the beginning of the year to sit down and look at what both your short-term and your long-term goals are, have those changed, have the things that you need to do because of that. Maybe your plan is to retire at 65 or maybe retire later or sooner. If there's been a change to that, then make sure that you're addressing any of these changes as far as how they might impact other parts of your financial plan. It's always a good idea to make sure that you have some type of emergency fund set aside, and anywhere from 3 to 6 months of your living expenses, depending on your job situation and what your income is like. So if you don't have an emergency fund or it's dwindled down, work to build that back up. Another good idea is always to look at the debt that you're carrying. And this year, it's been a great time to refinance any debt that you might have. If you have a mortgage that's at a high rate, I would say 4% or higher, even though historically that's not a high rate. Right now, that's a high rate. It's probably a good idea to see if it makes sense for you to refinance that mortgage. Or if you have credit cards or other debt that you're carrying, maybe it's possible to roll that into refinancing your mortgage where you can reduce the interest and the fees that you're being charged on that. And while you're looking at any loans that you're looking to refinance, it's not a bad idea to pull your credit report. And all the 3 credit agencies give you the ability to pull your credit report free from them once per year. So the 3 main credit agencies are TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. So you could once per year go to these companies. Maybe if you time this perfectly, every 4 months, you can pull your credit report for free, and you can make sure that things are accurate, that no one is using your credit, and also see where your score is at. Depending on the credit card that you use, you might also know your score. Like I have a Discover card, and right on the card every month it says what my credit number is. So that's another easy way that you can see what your credit score is, because that's an important thing. You want to keep that high, because if you do need to borrow money in the future in retirement, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to do so if you have a higher credit score. So the remaining tips really fall into one of 4 categories, and that's investment tips, tax tips, retirement planning tips, and also estate planning or wealth transfer tips. So we'll start with investment tips first. And as I mentioned earlier about your goals, it's also a good idea to look at what your current asset allocation is. I've talked in some previous podcasts, such as the 5-step portfolio process, that everyone should have a target asset allocation, and that's a mix between stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities, and cash. So it's a good idea to review your asset allocation, see if that needs to change at all, and also see where your investments are in line with that allocation. Despite everything we've gone through, obviously 2020 has gone down as a year that a lot of people want to forget. Depends on, what's happened to you. But 2020 has been a good year for the stock market, believe it or not. Depending on the indices that you look at, your portfolio is probably doing well this year. Some of the indices are up over 10%. So it's possible that your asset allocation could have gotten out of alignment. You might have more in stocks than you want to. So you want to make sure that you're rebalancing and getting back to that original asset allocation that you are targeting. And if you don't have an asset allocation and you really are just kind of winging it with what you're doing, this is a good time to develop an asset allocation and look across your different accounts to make sure that you're adhering to that. It's also probably a good time to review your 401k plan through work. 401k plans throughout the year will change some of the investment options that are offered. It's also possible too that your 401k provider might change. So if that's happened and you're in one of the default funds, which for many people has become a target date fund, and you'll see a year in the fund, such as 2030, let's say, and that would be the age that you're turning 65, presumably retiring. It's okay to use that fund, but you might also be better off building your own asset allocation fund, your own target date fund. So it's a good idea to review the funds that you're in, review the costs in your plan, and see if there are some better options available to you. And again, I mentioned that 5-step portfolio process podcast. And if you haven't listened to that, it's a good idea to go back and listen to that. Also looking at doing any year-end tax loss harvesting or tax gain harvesting. So what does that mean? That means that when looking at your taxable investments, your investments outside of your retirement account, do you have some investments that have gone up over the years, or maybe this year in particular, or some that are down? So if you have some that are down, it's really a no-brainer to think about selling those before year end. And what that will do for you is that will give you a tax deduction for your 2020 taxes. You're able to deduct up to $3,000 of your losses against your income for 2020. But in order to do that, you have to realize the loss, which means you have to sell the stock or the mutual fund to be able to take advantage of that. So that's an easy thing to do. And then as long as you wait 30 days to buy back that same stock or mutual fund, then you're in the clear. After the 30 days end, you can buy that investment back. Or during the 30 days, you can just buy a similar investment. As I mentioned earlier, we're uncertain as to what things are going to look like politically next year. And how that could impact your investment portfolio is that Joe Biden has talked of increasing taxes generally for people that have income over $400,000. And it's possible that he'll also increase the capital gains tax rate. Now, we're not really sure as to what that number could be, but there's talk about for people with income over $1 million, increasing that to 39.6% from currently 20%. There's also a 3.8% Medicare surcharge tax that also applies in that situation. So it's possible that the capital gains rate could more than double for some people. So if you're doing very well and you have high income over $400,000 or potentially over $1 million, you might want to think about realizing some gains this year if there could be tax savings in the future. Now, I know a little bit about how our government works. And if you remember back from political science class, we have 3 parts of our government. We have the executive branch and the judicial, and then the legislative branch. And the legislative branch is controlled by the House and the Senate. So if President-elect Biden decided to increase tax rates, he still would have to get that passed in the legislative branch, which is in the House and the Senate. Currently, Democrats control the House, but Republicans control the Senate. But what's unknown is whether or not the Democrats can pick up 2 of the potential runoff seats in Georgia in January. And if they're able to do that, then the Senate would be a 50-50 split, and any ties would be broken by the vice president. So if the Democrats are able to pick up 2 seats in the Senate, then there's the strong potential that tax rates will go up in 2021 and beyond. And the timing on this, unfortunately, is not good because we won't know the results of these 2 runoff elections in Georgia until after the beginning of the year. And the way that taxes are done, they're based on year end. So I would say for most people, you shouldn't probably sell some of your taxable investments to realize gains with the fear that capital gains rates will go up next year. And however, if you are in a position where your income is $1 million or more, then you may want to think about selling some investments and realizing gains because there could be significant tax savings for you. Another thing to watch out for is if you have mutual funds, as mutual funds pay out capital gains distributions at the end of the year. And this really applies to if you have mutual funds in your taxable accounts, then you may want to look at selling those funds before these capital gains distributions are paid out and repositioning that investment in either mutual funds that pay very little capital gains, and that would be usually index mutual funds, or what's known as exchange traded funds or ETFs, as those generate less capital gains. But the difficulty is that in order to do this, if you've had this mutual fund for a while, you have to realize the gain that you have made on the fund, if there is one, and that could trigger other taxes to save future taxes. So this is, again, not something to just do lightly. You really want to look at your tax situation, do a projection this year as to whether or not you should be selling this mutual fund this year, as there could be capital gain savings rates for this year and beyond. So next is I've jumped into talking about taxes a little bit, but it's hard sometimes not to talk about taxes when you're talking about investments, as they go hand in hand. But if we look at some of the other year-end tax strategies that you could take advantage of, another one in relation to what's going on with the unknown as far as where taxes might be next year and beyond, is that you could accelerate your income in a few different ways. And I talked about one of those ways where you could realize capital gains sooner than you may want to by, if you're in a really high income bracket, $1 million or more, you could pay those taxes now. Another option is that if you're retired or close to retiring and you think taxes will go up for you in the future, if your income is higher in retirement, then you may want to think about converting some of your traditional IRA or traditional 401ks to a Roth. And again, that's based on a year-end date. So if you want to do this, you'd have to do this before the end of the year. So we don't have a lot of time. As you're listening to this episode, there's only 3 weeks left in the year, but there's still time to do it. And a nice thing about doing this is this year, there is no required minimum distribution for 2020. That was waived at the beginning of the year due to the CARES Act. So that makes it even a better year to think about doing a Roth conversion, because normally you have required a minimum distribution that it used to start at 70.5. Now it's been pushed out to 72. And you have to take that out of your retirement accounts every year. And you can't roll that amount over and convert that to a Roth. So if you had to take out $20,000, let's say, for your RMD for this year, and you wanted to convert $20,000 also to a Roth, then you'd have to take out an additional $20,000. So $40,000 in total. This year, however, there is no required minimum distribution. So it might be a good idea for you to take that amount that you normally would have had to take out and pay tax on and convert that over to a Roth. The benefit is that if tax rates go up for everyone beginning 2021, then you will have saved some tax by paying the tax on that money now, and presumably at a lower rate. And also you're moving it over to the Roth account where, as things stand now, that money can stay in the Roth account until you pass away. And then if your spouse is still alive, then it could go into their name. And only then when your spouse is passed on, it would have to come out of the Roth IRA. And currently Roth IRAs, there is no tax due on the distributions. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing to think about is that if you have stock options and your stock options are either expiring in the next couple of years or they have a positive value to them, then it might not be a bad idea to think about exercising some of them this year. Generally, when you start exercising stock options, it's very easy for your income to go up significantly because the full value of the stock option is included in your taxable income. So this is a way that maybe by doing it this year, you could save some taxes if tax rates do go up next year. A positive thing that may come out of any tax changes, if President-elect Biden is able to repeal the previous tax act, which was the TCJA Act, which stands for Tax Cuts and Job Act. Part of that was a SALT tax cap, which is a state and local tax that you're capped at deducting $10,000 per year between state and local tax. So for myself, my fellow residents of Connecticut, other residents of the Northeast, where we have very high property tax and also state income tax, it's very easy that you can exceed this $10,000 number. And for most of us, because that is the cap, $10,000, to be able to use that as an itemized tax, many of us take the standard deduction. It's estimated that less than 10% of Americans now are actually itemizing their taxes. So most of us are taking the standard deduction. But if that is repealed, then it's possible that more people in the Northeast and high tax states will now be able to itemize their taxes, and the itemized deductions might exceed the standard deduction. So the standard deduction for a single filer is $12,000, and for a joint filer, it's $24,000. So it's possible that you might be able to exceed this, and there might be tax savings that might come out of this. The other thing is that currently, because most of us can't itemize, because we just take the standard deduction, that also means that we're not able to deduct any medical expenses or charitable contributions. Again, that might change next year. So if there's an expensive medical procedure that you're thinking of having done that you're going to have to pay for out of pocket, or if you were thinking of making a large charitable contribution, you might want to wait till next year to do that, to see what happens with the tax laws. And if Democrats are able to control the Senate and the House, then there's a strong possibility that you may be able to actually use these as itemized deductions, and there'll be a tax savings next year on that. One other thing I should mention about the charitable contributions, if you have found the last couple of years that you're no longer able to itemize, but you still want to make a charitable contribution, then one way you can do it is you can take it directly out of your retirement account and you can gift that directly to the charity, and you're able to do that up to $100,000. But I would say you probably want to wait to do that at least until next year when the required minimum distributions come back, because this is a way that you can satisfy your RMD by gifting that money directly to a charity. So another thing to think about is that if you're trying to help your children or grandchildren pay for college, you have the ability to contribute on their behalf to a 529 plan. And Connecticut, like a number of states, offers you the ability to take a tax credit based on the amount you contribute. It's $5,000 per person. So even if you're going to pay for these costs this coming year and you have the money set aside already, it could make sense to open a 529 account, and this would be through the CHEP plan, and put in $10,000, and then that would allow you to take a $10,000 deduction against your Connecticut state income tax, which, assuming a 5% Connecticut state income tax, you'd save about $500 by doing that. So make sure that you do that before year end. Another thing to think about is that if you have a 529 plan already and you took money out for your child to pay for tuition, but it was refunded due to the shortened college season, then you want to make sure that you put that money back in there. To learn more about 529 plans and ways to help your grandchildren pay for college, you could check out my episode, How to Help Your Grandchild Pay for College. Another thing to think about as far as retirement is that if you are thinking about setting up a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA, you still have time to do that. You have until April 15th, the tax filing deadline, to make that contribution. So you don't have to worry about that as much. But if you're self-employed or you have self-employed income and you're thinking about contributing that to your own 401k, make sure you set that up before the year end, because that's the deadline for that. If you happen to miss that, then you can still make a contribution, but it would have to go into a SEP, which isn't as favorable as far as the limits when compared to the traditional 401k. As we approach year end, it's also a good time to look at your retirement plan and see whether or not you're on track to achieving your retirement goals, seeing whether or not you're saving enough. Maybe you need to be saving more towards retirement. We went through a major stock market decline in March, and if you didn't do anything to your portfolio, most likely it's come back in value and is worth even more than you started with. So it's a good time to review your retirement plan and also your asset allocation, as I mentioned at the beginning, see if you need to adjust that if you're getting closer to retiring. And our final area we're going to talk about is from the estate planning wealth transfer side. And some things to think about with this is, has your estate plan been reviewed lately? Is your will up to date? Do you have your beneficiaries named on your retirement accounts? Do you have the other necessary estate planning documents, such as a healthcare power of attorney, financial power of attorney, a HIPAA form? These are always important things to do, but it's not a bad idea to review these documents if you haven't in a while. And as far as year-end things to think about, we talked earlier about the charitable giving that can be done, but also you can gift up to $15,000 per individual per year without having to worry about exceeding your gift tax limit. Now, for most people, currently the gift tax limit is not going to apply because you have an additional $11.58 million that you can either use up during your lifetime as a gift tax, or that can offset any estate taxes you can owe at your death. But there's talk next year about that being lowered if a Democratic Senate is to take place to maybe $5.85 million. And then anything over that would be taxed at 40%. So if that happens and you have a large estate, you want to make sure you review your estate plan to see if you need to do any additional planning as a result of that change. And that's where these $15,000 gifts can become more relevant. You can also gift an unlimited amount to pay for tuition or medical bills for anyone. So this is another way to exceed the $15,000 gift and help your children or grandchildren pay for things without having to worry about going over your lifetime gift allowance or estate tax exemption. To learn more about estate planning, you could check out my episode titled Estate Planning in 7 Steps. So this is a lot of stuff I've thrown out at you, but at least gives you a starting point for thinking about some year-end things that you should be doing, some that you need to take care of before the end of the year, and others that you could work on as we go into next year. I hope that you found this episode beneficial. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to talking to you next Wednesday. Take care.
You should consult a financial advisor familiar with your specific circumstances before you make any financial decisions. Nothing in this broadcast constitutes a solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. Any mention of rates of return are historical or hypothetical in nature and are not a guarantee of future returns. Ryan Morrissey, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Morrissey Wealth Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor.